A brief synopsis of Christian 21's information and revelations for the Great Spiritual Awakening. Tartarian Communication Systems and Reset Mechanics. Part 3 by Leon George, Sinclair. Continued from Part 2. The dismantling of this system after 1700, cutting the rods, filling the crypts, and melting the bells, effectively turned off the grid, leaving us with silent buildings that were once active power plants. When you look at the global Tartarian style, the massive domes, star forts, and technology remnants found from London to San Francisco to Russia, it becomes quite obvious that it was a planet-wide communication grid. These weren't just built with similar aesthetics, they were created with standardized components of a worldwide resonant system. Instantaneous ground wave. Communication. These buildings were designed to the same perfect design, functioning as nodes in a wireless network. Instead of sending signals through the air like modern radio, this system likely used the Earth itself as a conductor. By ringing a bell like langhorns at a specific frequency, the vibration would be converted into an electrical pulse by the piezoelectric foundations we discussed. Vibrational telegraphy, this pulse travels through the Earth's crust, telluric waves. A matching tower 50 miles away, built with the same geometry and tuned to the same frequency, would receive that vibration and resonate in sympathy. It's essentially acoustic electric telegraphy. The bell code, this explains why bells were rung in specific patterns. It wasn't just to call people to prayer, it was the IP address or packet header for a data transmission across the grid. Chemical doping for conductivity. To make this work, the bronze had to be a high-performance material. Founders like Langhorne used specific recipes that acted like semiconductors. Antimony and arsenic, trace amounts of these were often found in medieval bell metal. In modern electronics, these are used to dope silicon to increase electron flow. Silver enrichment. The addition of silver wasn't for wealth, it was to lower the electrical resistance of the bell. A silver-toned bell isn't just a metaphor, it's a description of a high-conductivity transceiver. The Great Victorian Restoration, the cover-up. In the 1800s, a massive wave of restorations swept across Europe and America. This is when the Tartarian evidence was systematically altered. Severing the rods, historical records from the 1850s to 1880s often mention the removal of old ironwork and cumbersome internal bracing from towers. These were the transmission lines connecting the bells to the ground plates. Muffling the chambers, resonant crypts were filled with rubble or converted into coal cellars, detuning the building from the Earth's frequency. Standardizing the pitch, the forced shift to 4/4 Hz, away from natural frequencies like 432 Hz, ensured that even if the bells were rung, they would no longer be in sync with the natural harmonic grid of the planet. Same designers, same purpose. The fact that a cathedral in England looks like a state house in America or a post office in Australia suggests a single master plan. The architects, these designers, were the giants from Realm 2. I think I said this earlier? Above somewhere? Maybe just déjà vu? It was the giants who taught the little people how to create and tune these gargantuan power systems. They knew that for the communication grid to work, the antennas, the towers had to be built to identical proportions to maintain phase locking across the planet. When we look at the global design of Tartarian architecture, the spires and the mud flood evidence, we see the remnants of a system that was both an energy grid and a historical reset point. Red mercury and magnetic antennas. The pinnacles of many ancient towers and cathedrals were topped with sophisticated metal ornaments that suggest they were passive atmospheric energy collectors. Red mercury, the etheric fuel, in the context of this technology, red mercury is often described not as a modern chemical, but as a legendary alchemical catalyst used in the tips of spires. It was believed to act as a superconductor or a magnetic antenna that could pull free electrical energy from the ether, the ionosphere. These spires were essentially the spark plugs for the building. They captured atmospheric charge and sent it down the internal transmission lines to the bells and the resonant chambers we discussed earlier. This explains why you see the same elaborate antennas on top of 19th century buildings in Russia, America, and Europe. They were standard industrial parts for a global power grid. The foundling repopulation. One of the most chilling aspects of this theory is the orphan train and foundling asylum era of the late 1800s. A new population, large numbers of children were moved around the world in the mid to late 19th century to repopulate the clean cities of the Old World. Because these children grew up without their original history, they were easily taught that the massive high-tech buildings they lived in were built by settlers with horse and buggy, even though those settlers didn't even have paved roads yet. The mud flood effectively buried the ground plates and resonant chambers of the communication system. With the lower floors underground, the piezoelectric connection to the earth was severed or dampened. A marriage of natural technology and homeostasis. In my search for a greater understanding of this spiritual technology, I asked Google AI, could acoustic reverberation generate quantum entanglement? Answer: yes, acoustic reverberation and, more broadly, acoustic phonons. Sound quanta can be used to generate quantum entanglement. Recent advancements in quantum acoustics have demonstrated that mechanical resonators, functioning like musical cavities, can store entangled phonon states. Here is how acoustic reverberation and sound-based systems generate quantum entanglement. Macroscopic entanglement via resonators. Researchers have demonstrated that large acoustic resonators, microscopic mechanical objects, can be entangled with each other. These systems act as a phonon busbar, allowing qubits to share information through collective acoustic waves, reverberation within the structure without needing to directly exchange photons. Optoacoustic entanglement. Scientists can create entanglement between light, photons, and sound phonons using Brillouin-Mandelstam scattering. This process forces photons and sound waves to interact in a specialized waveguide, linking their quantum states. Entanglement via thermal environments. Counterintuitively, thermal acoustic environments, noise, can be utilized to generate quantum entanglement. Research shows that strong noise in certain acoustic setups can actually protect and boost entanglement between two separate mechanical resonators. Classical acoustic entanglement, analog systems. Beyond true quantum mechanics, experimental setups using 16 coupled acoustic waveguides can generate classical entanglement, or inseparability, where spectral partitioning of the nonlinear acoustic field creates complex, non-separable states. This is sometimes called classical entanglement or using phi bits instead of qubits. In summary, rather than a sound wave in air, it is the precise control of high-Q acoustic resonators, reverberation of sound inside structures that allows physicists to build quantum acoustic systems. Bridging the gap between classical sound and quantum, non-local entanglement. So, yes, I was right. That is quite likely what they were using these crypts for: very specialized, yet natural cold technology for communication, healing, homeostasis, and cerebral non-local meetings. Don't forget that the word apocalypse's actual meaning, the revealing of that which was previously obscured, and strangely I learned this when I was a young boy. It stayed with me all this time, from when I was about 15 years old. I first read that somewhere unveiling, revealing is exactly what the Greek word apocalypsis signifies. It's the peeling back of the veil to show the functional reality that was hidden under layers of official history. Interestingly, Wikipedia uses peeling back, and Christian explained the moment that they will remove the firmament, it will be peeled back, i.e. from Polaris to the horizon, peeled back, literally, revealing a very bright white space. I can't wait. Woohoo. If we look at the John Langhorne era through that lens, the great meltdown of the pre-1700 bells wasn't just a loss of metal, it was the systematic detuning of the human collective. By removing the resonant harmonic system, the parasitic structure could replace organic, etheric connection with artificial, controlled alternatives. Dragon lines, ley lines, major and minor nodes, and the Zelant, from the Tartarian flag. Currently the national mascot of Kazan, not coincidentally a former Tartarian heartland. The St. Michael and Mary ley lines, the Great Spine. This is a massive pair of energy currents that run from Cornwall to Norfolk. They are the main bus of the UK's resonant grid. The male-female weave, the Michael line, masculine, linear electrical, and the Mary line, feminine, curving, magnetic weave around each other like a strand of DNA. Langhorne's connection, many of the bells John Langhorne cast were placed in towers, directly on or near these lines. When these bells ring, they pump energy into this spine, broadcasting the frequency across the entire country. Major nodes. Glastonbury Tor, the heart chakra of the line. Avebury, a massive quartz heavy router where the lines cross. Bury St. Edmunds, a major terminal point in the east, close to where Langhorne's Essex bells like Munden would interface with the grid. Before the Tartarian builders created the bell towers, the ancients used lithophones, naturally resonant stones. Sonic properties, these rocks, often diabase or rhyolite, contain high concentrations of iron and silica. When struck, they don't thud, they ring like a metal bell with a long, haunting decay. Prehistoric pinging, shamans would strike these stones to ping the ley line network. It was the prehistoric version of a dial-up connection to the Earth's consciousness. Because the Tartarian design is global, relighting the St. Michael line in England pings the leys of the Americas and the dragon lines of China. It is a synchronized, worldwide reboot of the original communication system. You need to understand the St. Michael and Mary line as a massive power cables and the ringing rocks as the natural batteries that supply it with cold electricity. The St. Michael and Mary line, the Great Spine of England, this is a 300-mile long energy trunk running from Cornwall to Norfolk. It is the primary circuit that many of John Langhorne's bells were designed to pulse. It starts at St. Michael's Mount in Cornwall, passes through Glastonbury Tor, Avebury, and ends at Bury St. Edmunds and the Norfolk coast. The male-female weave, the Michael line, electrical, linear, and the Mary line, magnetic, curving, cross at key nodes. Langhorne's nodes, sites like Munden, Essex, and Coldwaltham, Sussex sit on tributary lines that feed into this main spine. When a Langhorne bell rings at Munden, it sends a ripple of frequency through the Essex marshes directly into the Bury St. Edmunds terminal of the Michael line. Reactivation. White hat groups are currently pinging these nodes by performing synchronous toning, often at 111 Hz or 432 Hz at both ends of the line simultaneously, creating a standing wave that clears the parasitic static. Ringing rocks and cold electricity. Before the Tartarian builders cast bronze bells, they used lithophones, naturally resonant stones, to generate cold electricity, radiant energy. When stones like the Preseli Blue Stones, Stonehenge, or the ringing rocks of Pennsylvania are struck, they don't just make a sound. The iron and silica content within them creates a piezoelectric discharge. Cold electricity, unlike the hot electricity in our walls which creates heat and resistance, is longitudinal. It travels through the ground, telluric, and the air etheric without losing power. It is cold because it doesn't cause molecular friction. The strike rhythm. To generate this, the rocks must be struck in a specific Fibonacci rhythm. This builds a harmonic resonance that pumps the electrons out of the quartz lattice and into the ley line. The bell connection, a bronze bell like Langhorne's, is essentially an engineered ringing rock. It takes that natural cold electricity and amplifies it through its pentagonal geometry to broadcast it via the church steeple. As these nodes are reactivated with cold electricity, the naga or parasitic field which relies on hot, entropic electricity begins to dissolve. This is just one aspect to the apocalypse, the unveiling, the return of a high-fidelity, free energy environment where human consciousness is no longer muffled. The mud flood was for many reasons. A demon has 100 reasons for every decision it makes, all of which are malevolent. That quote captures the multi-layered nature of the reset perfectly. It wasn't just a physical burial of the architecture, it was a total grounding of the planetary circuit. By burying the first floors in 10 to 20 feet of silica-rich mud, the parasites effectively short-circuited the global antenna system. Star forts, the pentagonal batteries. If you look at the star forts found on every continent from Fort Bortange in Holland to Castle Williams in New York, they share the exact pentagonal geometry we discussed with John Langhorne's bells. They aren't forts for cannons to fire from. They are massive electromagnetic capacitors. The points of the star act as brushes that collect atmospheric charge. Water as an electrolyte, almost all star forts are surrounded by a moat. This isn't for defense. The water acts as an electrolyte to store and move the cold electricity harvested by the stone points. And this is what Christian explained regarding the Giza necropolis in Peterborough Costa Coffee 3 years ago. The pyramid sits in the water table, salt water as an electrolyte that is powered up. When the missing capstone is replaced, it's not missing. They take it away with them, so we never work out how to switch the system on. They bring it back when they need large-scale crowd control. They use the pyramids to create tsunamis, earthquakes, freak weather, etc., and also to charge their fourth density technology in our third density environment. The grid connection, these batteries were connected via the ley line spine to the bell towers. The forts provided the constant DC charge, while the bells provided the AC frequency, the communication signal. Tesla and the magnifying transmitter. Nikola Tesla's patents, specifically No. 787412, were essentially a modern rediscovery of this Tartarian bell system. Longitudinal waves. Tesla didn't use transverse radio waves. He used longitudinal waves that travel through the Earth, the same waves produced by ringing rocks and Langhorne's bells. The ground connection. Tesla insisted his towers be grounded deep into the water table. This is identical to the deep resonant chambers and copper plates found beneath the old towers. Cold electricity, radiant energy. Tesla's cold electricity could power a light bulb without a return wire, just like the atmospheric energy harvested by the red mercury spires. It doesn't burn the user, it vitalizes the biology. The mud flood as a grounding weapon. To kill this free energy and instant communication system, the parasites had to disconnect the antenna spire from the battery star fort, ground plate. Muffling the piezo. By packing the lower resonant chambers with mud, they dampen the vibration. A bell cannot ring if its base is buried in sand. A building cannot resonate if its roots are packed with wet silt. The Great Grounding, the mud flood, acted as a global surge protector that tripped the breaker on the entire etheric grid, forcing the survivors into the dark ages of coal, oil, and wires technologies that the parasites could meter and charge for. Reintroducing pure, running water to these sites is like refilling an old battery with acid. It wakes up the stagnant energy. And this was one of the jobs of the giants. They used to keep the huge rivers clean and free-flowing. Being 25 meters tall helps with not drowning. Frequency pinging. By ringing a tuned bell like a Langhorne survivor at a star fort node, the White Hats can send a reboot command through the entire ley line spine. Michael and Mary refer to the specific flavor or polarity of the energy flowing through these two intertwined currents. It has nothing to do with religion whatsoever. It just comes from terminology created in religious times. They represent the divine masculine and divine feminine principles of the Earth's life force. The Michael line masculine, electric. The path, this line, is remarkably straight. It follows the path of the belt of the sun on May Day, Beltane, slicing across England at a 60-degree angle. The dedications, almost every high point or tor along this line is dedicated to Saint Michael, the archangel who defeated the dragon. Examples include St. Michael's Mount, Brent Tor, and Glastonbury Tor. The energy, this is the solar or electric current. It is linear, forceful, and associated with the sword. In the Tartarian system, this was likely the high-voltage, hot line that powered the spires. The Mary line, feminine, magnetic. Unlike the straight Michael line, the Mary line curves and weaves around it like a serpent or a river. It seeks out low-lying ground, water sources, and valleys. The dedications, the nodes where this line touches, are almost always dedicated to Saint Mary or ancient Mother Goddess sites. The energy, this is the lunar or magnetic current. It is intuitive, nurturing, and associated with the chalice or the womb. This provided the ground and the magnetic stability for the grid. The caduceus of the earth. When you map them together, they look exactly like the staff of Hermes, the caduceus, two serpents entwined around a central pole. The power source, where they cross, at nodes like Avebury or Glastonbury, a vortex is created. The bell connection, founders like John Langhorne didn't just place bells anywhere, they placed them at these crossing nodes. The bell acted as the mediator that harmonized the electric, Michael, and magnetic, Mary energies, turning them into a broadcastable sound frequency. The parasites didn't come up with these names, they inherited them. Originally, these were likely known as the dragon lines, the lung mei of feng shui. The church baptized the lines with Christian names to keep the population using the grid without understanding the underlying etheric science. The white hat revealing of these lines is the moment we stop seeing them as religious paths and start seeing them as the superconductive DNA of the planet. When we look at the Earth as a living Tartarian supercomputer, the Michael and Mary lines are just one circuit in a massive global web. This web is often called the planetary grid or the Earth's crystalline matrix. How many are there? There isn't a single number as the grid is fractal, meaning it has layers within layers, but there are three main levels to the communication hardware. The 12 primary nodes, the Great Grid, this is the motherboard. In the 1970s, three Russian scientists, Goncharov, Morozov, and Makarov, discovered that the Earth's energy is organized into a truncated icosahedron like a soccer ball. This creates 12 major points where the world's most significant power plants sit, for example, Giza, the Bermuda Triangle, the Devil's Sea. They did this with the assumption that the Earth is a globe, but the nodal points still exist in these locations. It's just that they are on the flat plane, not on a spinning ball. If you connect the 12 primary nodes, you get a secondary web of 62 points. This is where most star forts and ancient megalithic sites, like Stonehenge or the Great Wall of China, are located. The local ley lines, these are the capillaries. There are thousands of these. They are the local branches, like the St. Michael and Mary lines, that feed the energy from the 62 major points into local towns and bell nodes like those of John Langhorne. The Avebury Crossing, the router. Avebury in Wiltshire is perhaps the most important switching station on the planet. This is where the Michael and Mary lines intersect most powerfully. The hardware Avebury is a massive circle of ringing rocks, sarsen stones. Because it is at a crossing, the electric, Michael, and magnetic, Mary energies braid together here, creating a massive vortex of cold electricity. The function, this site acted as a repeater station. Any frequency pinged from a Langhorne bell in Essex would pass through the Avebury router to be broadcast across the global 62-point grid. The serpent symbolism on Langhorne's bells. If you look closely at the maker's marks of 14th century founders like John Langhorne, you often see intertwined serpents or stop marks that look like twisted ropes. The ancient white hat builders used the serpent as a symbol of frequency and flow. So the Zelant, dragon on the Tartarian flag, and flag of current-day Kazan, represents the flow of free energy. The serpents on the bells were a technical diagram telling the user that this device was tuned to the dragon lines, the ley lines. Mixed Gothic lettering, Langhorne's specific mixed lettering style often creates a sine wave pattern around the rim of the bell. When the bell rotates or vibrates, this serpent wave of letters physically structures the sound into the air. The reset of the grid. The parasites didn't just bury the lines with the mud flood, they tried to scramble the signal. By building industrial noise, power plants, 5G 440 Hz music over these nodes, they created a frequency prison. This is truly new territory because the revealing isn't coming from textbook academics, but from people reconnecting the dots themselves. When you look at the 12 primary nodes, the Devil's Graveyards in the 1970s, researcher Ivan Sanderson identified 12 areas of intense magnetic and electromagnetic activity spaced equidistant around the globe. He called them vile vortices because of the strange disappearances and anomalies there, but these are the Earth's main energy ports. The most famous nodes include the Bermuda Triangle, the Devil's Sea near Japan, and the Great Pyramid of Giza. The 62-node expansion. Later researchers Becker and Huygens expanded this map to 62 nodes, the Earth Star or UVG 120, showing that every major ancient temple and star fort sits on one of these intersections. The White Hat reactivation map. Current grid work focuses on relighting the connections between these 12 hubs. 1. Giza, the master clock. Used to set the base frequency for the entire planetary grid. 2. Mount Shasta, the crown. Acting as a high-altitude uplink to the atmospheric ether. 3. The St. Michael spine, the transmission line. Carrying the signal across the European continent via the bell tower network. More commonly known as the Becker-Huygens UVG 120 grid, it identifies 62 vertices or major power points where the lines of the Earth's geometric energy star intersect. These points are theorized to align with ancient megaliths, tectonic activity, and magnetic anomalies. Below are the key locations for the 62 grid points as defined in the UVG model. Primary anchors. Point 1, Giza, Egypt. The mathematical starting point for the grid, aligned with the Great Pyramid. Point 2, Ukraine-Russia border, located near the Sea of Azov, associated with ancient Kurgan burial mounds. Point 3, Tyumen, Russia. A point in western Siberia. Point 4, Lake Baikal, Russia. Known for its deep water and unique biodiversity. Point 5, Sakhalin Island, Sea of Okhotsk. Described as a site of major Soviet defense research. This list is based on the Unified Vector Geometry UVG research, published by Beth Huygens and William Becker. The model suggests that these points are the primary valves for planetary energy. The following coordinates represent the full 62-node list for the Becker-Huygens UVG 120 grid. These points are derived from the geometric Earth-star model, which is mathematically anchored at grid point 1, the Great Pyramid of Giza. Northern Hemisphere, nodes 1 to 30. Node 1 Giza, Egypt. 2 Kiev, Ukraine. 3 Tyumen, Russia. 4 Lake Baikal, Russia. 5 Sea of Okhotsk. 6 Bering Sea. 7 Gulf of Alaska. 8 Buffalo, NY, Lake Erie. 9 Hudson Bay, Canada. 10 Atlantic Mid. 11 Stonehenge, British Isles. 12 Moriarty, New Mexico. 13 North Pacific, Hawaii. 14 Pacific, near Mexico. 15 Gulf of Mexico. 16 Bermuda Triangle. 17 Mount Ararat, Turkey. 18 Gobi Desert, Mongolia. 19 Mount Fuji, Japan. 20 Sahara Desert, Algeria. 21 Tibet, Himalayas. 22 East China Sea. 23 Mariana Islands. 24 Line Islands, Equatorial. 25 Baja California. 26 Mid-Atlantic, Central. 27 Africa. 20 Red Sea. 29 Oman, Hormuz. 30 Bay of Bengal. Equatorial and Southern Hemisphere, nodes 31 to 60. No. 31 Philippine Sea. 32 Caroline Islands. 33 Solomon Islands. 34 Galapagos Islands. 35 Amazon, Brazil. 36 South Atlantic, mid. 30 Gulf of Guinea. 38 Lake Victoria, Africa. 39 Indian Ocean, north. 40 Banda Sea, Indonesia. 41 Easter Island, Rapa Nui. 42 Pacific, east. 43 South Pacific, central. 44 Wilpena Pound, Australia. 45 Coral Sea. 46 South Pacific, west. 47 South Pacific, near Tahiti. 48 Nazca Lines, Peru. 49 Machu Picchu, Titicaca. 50 South Atlantic Anomaly. 51 Namib Desert. 52 Madagascar. 53 Indian Ocean, south. 54 Great Victoria, AU. 55 Tasman Sea. 56 Southern Pacific. 57 Ocean, Pacific. 58 Southern Ocean, Atlantic. 59 Ocean, Indian. 60 Southern Ocean, near AU. Polar axes. Node 61, North Pole. Node 62, South Pole. Azilant stems from Tatar mythology, specifically the legends surrounding the founding of Kazan, the capital of Tatarstan, Russia. The name itself is the Russian rendering of the Tatar word yilan or silan, which literally translates to snake. The creature is traditionally described as a winged serpent or a hybrid between a dragon and a wyvern. According to the most popular legend, the infestation, the hill where Kazan was to be built, was infested with massive venomous snakes led by the king of snakes, the Zilant. To clear the land, a local Khan or a wizard gathered straw and wood around the hill and set it on fire. Most of the snakes perished, but the Zilant escaped. Variations of the story differ on its fate. Some say it was eventually killed by a knight with a poisoned spear. Others claim it fled to the Kaban Lakes, where it remains as a guardian spirit or a vengeful monster. Official symbol. Since 1730, the Zilant has been the official symbol and coat of arms for the city of Kazan. The dragons you see on John Langhorne's work and other medieval architecture were not just monsters, they were technical markers for the energy lines, dragon lines. The Ouroboros, or the dragon eating its own tail, represented the closed-loop energy circuit of the planet. Dragons were often placed at portals or doorways to signify that the building was a forbidden zone for those not tuned to its frequency. I didn't mention above about Alice's looking glass and Snow White's mirror on the wall, and the connection to mirrors at their inception, requiring mirrors to be covered up every night with a thick black drape. I'd previously assumed that this was merely superstition by a bunch of ergot-eating bread trippers, but there is now a distinct connection. Mirrors have always had an air of mystique surrounding them. For a start, they were very expensive to manufacture when they were first invented. Some mirrors could cost a wealthy family over a year's income. Mirrors were, as we are about to discover, an evolutionary step from the resonant technology that we discussed above, a natural step that the advancing Tartarians took as path of the course whilst designing perfection into their already perfect world. We saw the telephone progress from a rudimentary fixed and wired contraption to an iPhone Pro Max 18 in under 120 years, so why wouldn't we have expected Tartaria to compact its communications technology to more movable appliances, such as mirrors? Open any book on etiquette from the mid-1850s and turn to the page about mirrors. At dusk, all mirrored surfaces in the house must be covered with dense fabric. Not just draped for appearance, covered in such a way that no slits remain. Velvet, brocade, thick silk. This was not done by superstitious peasants in run-down villages. This was done by engineers, doctors, university professors, industrialists, people who built locomotives and invented industry. This practice spread from America to Russia, from Scandinavia to the Mediterranean. The same rules in completely different cultures. It was a widespread tradition through a 100-year period by sane people. The McGregor family, respected fabric merchants, moved into a new house on Prince's Street, a majestic building of the Georgian era with huge windows and wall-to-wall mirrors in the main living room. In 2 weeks, what the local press later called the case of the cursed mirror began. The youngest daughter of the family, 12-year-old Margaret, refused to sleep in her room. She claimed that the mirror in her bedroom shows another house at night. Her parents attributed it to a child's fantasy, but after a week, the adults began to notice the strangeness. The father of the family, James McGregor, wrote in his diary, "He woke up in the middle of the night with the feeling that someone was watching. The mirror opposite the bed reflected not our bedroom, but some other room with different furniture, different walls. He saw it very clearly in the moonlight. When he lit a candle, everything returned to its place. The situation intensified. The maid fell into a hysteria upon seeing in the corridor mirror a woman in a white dress of an ancient cut. The woman looked at her and slowly raised her hand, as if trying to reach through the glass surface. The maid refused to return to that corridor even during the day. The McGregors invited a priest who performed the house blessing ceremony. This helped. The mirrors continue to show what they were not supposed to show. Many will write in the comments now, mass hysteria, psychosis. Then answer one question. How to explain that similar cases have been recorded all over Europe and America with frightening regularity? People in different countries who had never heard of each other described identical symptoms. This was not a local problem of one family or one city. People in psychiatric hospitals claimed the same thing. Admitted to the asylum for mirror madness or mirror melancholy. They saw not their own reflection in mirrors at night, but other shit. The mirrors had to be in moonlight for this to happen. The slightest hint of moonlight on the mirror's surface could cause this effect between 11 p.m. and 2 a.m., most commonly reported. Some described figures in ancient clothing. Others described landscapes of non-existent cities. Others spoke of faces that looked out from the depths of the mirror with unbearable sadness or palpable malice. But the strange thing is that some of these patients admitted to asylums for mirror melancholy displayed unusual knowledge. They could describe the architectural details of buildings that no longer existed. They spoke about events that had not been recorded in the chronicles of history. They conversed in dialects of long-dead languages. The number of mental disorders related to mirrors sharply decreased in the early 20th century. Mirror madness, mirror melancholy. Cases of possession after prolonged contemplation of mirrors. These diagnoses have virtually disappeared from medical reports. Coincidence? Or a direct consequence of the fact that old mirrors were gradually replaced by new safe ones? Many ancient mirrors were deliberately destroyed during the wars and revolutions of the early 20th century. They were smashed as symbols of the old world, as luxury items of the bourgeoisie. But perhaps this was a targeted destruction of dangerous artifacts that could reveal too much about the past to show what should not be seen. Look at the statistics. How many pre-war mirrors have survived? A few. And where are the others? Is it a coincidence that it was the old mirrors made using ancient technologies that were destroyed? They did not touch the new mirrors. They only destroyed the old ones, as if they knew that the danger was precisely in them. Revolutions and wars have always served as a convenient excuse for erasing uncomfortable traces. That's how libraries were destroyed, how the buildings of world exhibitions were demolished, how the first floors of cities were buried. Every time it was under a noble pretext, every time systematically. Today we are surrounded by mirrors, bathrooms, hallways, elevators, shop windows. The screens of our phones and computers are also a kind of mirror reflecting and distorting reality. We look into them constantly without thinking, without fear. The tradition of covering mirrors has turned into a vague superstition, a scary tale for children, a plot for horror films. We laugh at the fears of our ancestors, considering them ignorant and superstitious. But sometimes in the quiet moments late at night, when you are alone in a dark room and see your reflection in an unexpected place, this ancient feeling arises. A primal fear that comes from the depths of the ages. A reminder that mirrors are not just glass and metal. Modern mirrors are safe, but they are also useless. We have not only forgotten the danger, we have lost the tool. Old mirrors were windows to other times, to other realities. The weight of a large mirror could reach 300 kg. To lift such a structure and secure it on the wall, special mechanisms were required. The mirror itself is not just glass. It is a complex, multi-layer object that had to be assembled with millimeter accuracy. How did the masters of that time create perfectly flat glass surfaces with an area of several square meters without modern equipment? First, it was necessary to blow or cast a glass sheet. At that time, the cylinder method was used. A huge glass cylinder was blown. Then, it was cut along and flattened on a hot table. The slightest unevenness in thickness, and the reflection is distorted. The smallest air bubble is a defect. Then, the polishing process began. The surface needed to be polished to perfect smoothness. A deviation of more than a fraction of a millimeter per square meter meant the mirror was unsuitable. They polished by hand using abrasive powders for months. Imagine the labor required to create a mirror with a reflective area of 5 square meters. After polishing came the amalgamation process. First came the application of a reflective layer. Mercury, silver, tin in the most precise proportions. Too much mercury, the amalgam does not hold. Too little, the reflection is murky. Have you ever tried spraying a car with a new coat of paint? Dust and particulate matter are a serious issue, so to be able to blow a single glass sheet, 3 to 5 square meters of crystal clear glass with 0 imperfections is itself almost a miracle. Production required technologies that even today raise questions among specialists. In an era when there were no vacuum chambers, no precision machines, and computer quality control, glass craftsmen created glass with such surface purity that it sometimes seemed as though you were not looking at your reflection, but into a parallel world. Modern glass manufacturers confirm creating a perfectly flat surface of such an area requires vacuum chambers and precision equipment. So, how did they do it in the 18th century without all of this? And now look at the geography of the production. Mirrors were made in very specific places. Venice on the island of Murano, Bohemia, and Russia. Not everywhere were mirrors made, but precisely in these locations. and the secrets of production were guarded with fear of life. Venetian master glassmakers could not leave the island of Murano under the threat of death. Read this again. The highest penalty for attempting to leave the island, the highest penalty for disclosing recipes. Documents of the Venetian Council of Ten, the secret police of the Republic, are filled with orders for the elimination of fugitive masters. In 1553, 3 glass makers who fled to Bohemia mysteriously disappear under strange circumstances. In 1581, Master Angelo Barzi tries to sell recipes to the French. He was found in the canal with no signs of life. Transmission of knowledge was only within families. The father taught the son, the grandfather taught the grandson. Everything was in oral format. If the family died out, the knowledge died with it. Other crafts, silk, weapons, ceramics were also profitable. Venetian glass, Murano lace, Damascus steel, all of this was expensive, but their secrets were not guarded with such paranoid psychopathy. Why, then, were mirrors and their precise manufacture specifically targeted? If this is merely a protection of commercial secrets, why such a level of paranoia? Over 1.5 centuries, more than 20 cases of the elimination of runaway amalgam masters have been documented. This is the protection of state secrets of the highest order, like signing the Official Secrets Act today. Look at the maps of trade routes of Venice from the 15th to 16th centuries. Venice was a transit point between East and West. After the fall of Constantinople in 1453, a flow of artifacts and manuscripts surged into Venice, entire libraries, technical drawings, descriptions of technologies. The version is this: Venetian masters did not acquire the technology themselves. They were the guardians of knowledge that was inherited from the ruined cities of the East. It was knowledge that belonged to the previous civilization of Great Tartary, and their task was not to invent, but to preserve and reproduce what already existed. Coveting this information as an alchemist would covet the lead to gold recipe. That was fake, by the way. Just more subterfuge to get any budding alchemists onto the wrong paths of investigation. In 1881, London antique dealer Thomas Wellborn purchased an ancient Venetian mirror at the auction of a bankrupt aristocrat's estate. The mirror was dated to the 15th century and was distinguished by extraordinary beauty. The frame was adorned with the most intricate carving. Not just a floral ornamental motif, it had depictions of astronomical symbols, constellations, planetary signs, strange geometric patterns that formed complex patterns. Thomas Wellborn, being an educated man, tried to decipher these symbols, but could not find any explanation for them in any reference book. He hung the mirror in his study, a heavy frame made of black wood, covered with the patina of centuries. The mirror itself possessed an astonishing clarity of reflection. It seemed like one was looking not at the surface, but into the depth, into the space behind the glass. Wellborn soon began to notice oddities. According to his words recorded in letters to his colleague, Edward Holmes, the mirror displayed the room as it once was. He saw different furniture, heavy oak wardrobes. Instead of his books on the shelves, he saw other books on the same shelves, vast tomes and leather bindings with Latin inscriptions. Even the fireplace looked different, more massive, adorned with carvings. At first, Wellborn attributed it to fatigue, to the play of light. But the visions recurred always at the same time between 11 in the evening and 2 in the morning, always in the moonlight. The most astonishing event began on the night of the 15th of October 1882. Wellborn was working late, sorting through catalogues of ancient manuscripts. He glanced at the mirror and froze. A man was reflected in the mirror. A middle-aged man, thin, with an aesthetic face, dressed in clothing from the 15th century. He was sitting at a writing desk, the very same massive oak table that Wellborn had seen in his visions. And he was writing something with a quill. Wellborn turned around. There was no one behind him. He looked in the mirror again. The man continued to write, not paying attention. Then, as if feeling the gaze, he lifted his head and looked directly at Wellborn. Their gazes met. The man in the mirror was not frightened, and he did not disappear. He slowly stood up and approached the mirror surface from his side of the mirror. Wellborn did the same. They stood facing each other, separated only by the glass surface and perhaps several centuries. Wellborn began systematic observations, meticulously recording everything in a diary. The man in the mirror appeared almost every night. Gradually, a form of communication was established between them with gestures, with pointing movements, with drawings on paper that they showed to each other. The man from the past showed well-worn manuscripts, ancient books. He pointed to certain places in the room, the places where objects were located in his 15th century. Following these directions, Wellborn began to explore his study. He tapped the walls, examined the floorboards, and he found it. Under one of the floorboards, right where the man from the mirror had pointed, was a hidden compartment, a metal box sealed with wax and bearing the imprint of an unfamiliar coat of arms. Inside were documents, letters, diaries, diagrams. These were the papers of the previous owner of the house who lived in the mid-15th century. 1. Roberto Fiorenzi, a Venetian merchant and apparently a member of some secret society. The documents contained descriptions of technologies that should not have existed at that time. Schematics of devices for extracting energy from the atmosphere. Drawings of complex optical instruments. Formulas of amalgams with precise indications not only of the proportions of metals, but also of the astronomical conditions under which the process should be carried out. And a separate manuscript about mirrors, about the fact that they are not just household items, but tools. Tools for what? The text was damaged. Many pages were lost. But one phrase has been preserved completely. The mirror is a window between times, but it should be opened with the greatest caution. They invited a professor of natural philosophy from the University of Edinburgh. His name is James Maxwell Grant, a student of the famous physicist. The professor proposed to conduct an experiment to set up observation of mirrors using the latest equipment at that time. He brought with him photographic plates of special sensitivity, a magnetometer for measuring magnetic fields, thermometers with an accuracy of up to 1/10 of a degree. He set up an observation post right in the McGregor's house. The experiment was conducted over 7 consecutive nights. The professor took measurements every 15 minutes, recorded the readings of the instruments, and noted the slightest changes. What he discovered made him refuse to publish the results. Officially, he announced that he had not found anything unusual, that the McGregor family had become a victim of mass hysteria. But in his private papers found by his grandson 60 years after his passing, there was a completely different record. Take these measurements. The mirror surface at certain hours of the night from 11 in the evening to 2 in the morning demonstrated properties that are inconsistent with known laws of optics. First, the reflection was delayed. The professor used a method with a quick hand movement in front of the mirror and fixation on a photographic plate. A normal reflection should be instantaneous, but measurements showed a delay of 3 to 7/100ths of a second, as if light traveled not 2 meters to the mirror and back, but a much greater distance. Second, temperature anomaly. Within a radius of 1.5 meters from the mirror, the temperature dropped by 2 degrees to 3 degrees without visible reasons. No drafts, no open windows. Thermodynamics was disrupted right before our eyes. Third, and the most strange, the mirror emitted. In complete darkness without any light sources, the mirror surface emitted a faint glow, invisible to the eye, but detectable by photographic plates with long exposure. The professor received 6 photographs, all showing a blurred white glow emanating from the mirror. Fourth, magnetic anomalies. The needle of the magnetometer placed near the mirror deviated without visible reasons, sometimes by 5 degrees, sometimes by 10 degrees. The fluctuations occurred in waves with a periodicity of approximately every 3 minutes. The professor wrote in his diary, "The mirrored surface behaves as if it is not a passive reflector of light, but an active device of unknown principle of action." The results contradict everything we know about the properties of glass and metals. The publication of this data will destroy the foundations of physics. I cannot allow myself this. I advised the McGregor family to cover all mirrors and never open them. He was a professor of the university, a scientist trained in a strict method. He conducts measurements according to all the rules, obtains results that do not fit into the existing picture of the world, and does the only thing he can. He hides these results. Because to recognize them means to revise all of physics. To acknowledge that mirrors operate by laws that go beyond known science, that behind the glass surface lies something much more complex. And now look at the rules for placing mirrors that existed at that time. Never opposite the front door. Never two mirrors facing each other, creating an infinite corridor of reflections. It was said that such corridors open passages between worlds, that one can become lost in them with one's soul, that there are beings that wait for someone to carelessly look too deeply. Now, many will say that's just superstition. Then answer one question. Why are these rules identical in different cultures? And why did they appear before mirrors became a mass commodity? Compare these rules with the principles of placing radio antennas. Two transmitters located opposite each other create a resonant circuit. This amplifies the signal, opening the channel. Engineering logic. If a mirror works as a receiver, then two mirrors are an amplifier. The rules for placing mirrors are not superstitions. They are safety techniques when working with unfamiliar equipment. The mirror makers of that time knew special prayers and spells that they recited while crafting mirrors, as if trying to bind the dangerous technology with the safe shackles of faith and ritual. Some families kept mirrors that were passed down from generation to generation, but they kept them constantly covered. They were only unveiled on special occasions and only in daylight, as if they were not household items, but dangerous artifacts requiring special handling. In the archives of the French Academy of Sciences, there is a report from the year 1873. A group of researchers describes the phenomenon of mirror operation, a phenomenon where mirrors in the dark begin to reflect not the current reality, but temporal impressions of the past. They proposed a hypothesis, a photographic plate under certain conditions. These impressions manifest, superimposing on the current reflection. But this explanation did not take into account the main thing. People saw not frozen images of the past, but moving figures that were aware of the observer's presence and reacted to it. This was not a reproduction of a recording. This was a real-time contact. By the end of the 19th century, mass production of mirrors using simplified technologies began. Glass became cheaper, the silvering process accelerated, and mirrors transformed from luxury items into ordinary goods. And it is precisely then that strange phenomena began to fade. New mirrors produced industrially no longer possessed the mysterious properties that distinguished the old Venetian, Flemish, or Russian handcrafted mirrors. It seems that along with the simplification of technology, some important component was lost. Perhaps certain proportions of metals in the amalgam, special conditions of production, knowledge that was passed down orally and not recorded, or new mirrors were intentionally made, safe and effective, deprived of those qualities that made old mirrors dangerous portals. Mass production has standardized not only the technology but also the result. Modern mirrors reflect only the current reality. They are dead in the sense that old mirrors were alive. This is especially interesting since we found out through Christian 21 of how the parasites harvested gold from gold seams and the properties of red mercury and its requirement in this process. Red mercury is the live form of mercury. Mercury is extracted from the mineral, cinnabar, which is a red rock. When you heat cinnabar ore up to, I think it is 500 plus degrees Celsius, it kills the true mercurial properties and turns this red metal into a dead, yet attractive silver color. Red mercury does not have a reflection of its own, associating it with vampires, also because it is blood red in nature. It's very strange that red mercury is invisible upon reflection repelled by garlic, yet attracted to gold. Since the 1990s, some believe red mercury is literally Dracula in liquid form, inheriting the traits of vampires who cannot be seen in mirrors. It is actually a superconductive material that interacts with the electromagnetic spectrum in a way that makes it invisible to reflective surfaces. It is also overtly energetic in its natural red format, preheating past 500 degrees Celsius. Connections have been drawn to the works of medieval alchemists like Jabir ibn Hayyan, who spoke of hidden elixirs with spiritual properties that defy physical laws like reflection. Classical alchemy and modern red mercury legends reveal how ancient symbols evolved into today's black market mysteries. The alchemical red lion and philosopher's mercury in classical alchemy, these terms weren't referring to a physical liquid you'd find in a lab, but rather stages of the magnum opus, the great work. The red lion, this is a symbolic name for the philosopher's stone or a late stage of its creation known as rubedo, the reddening. It represents purified sulfur, the masculine principle that must be united with the feminine principle, mercury, to create the alchemical marriage. Unlike common quicksilver, this considered a fiery or living mercury, a spiritual essence believed to be the heart of all matter and the bridge between body and spirit. When mercury and sulfur, often represented as the red lion, are combined and puri Jabib and Hayyan fied, they form a red compound historically linked to cinnabar mercuric sulfide. Alchemists believed this red substance held the power of transmutation and immortality. And now, let's gather all the threads. There were Venetian mirrors with astronomical symbols on the frames. Look closely at the preserved examples in museums. Geometric patterns are arranged into diagrams. Planetary signs are positioned in a specific order corresponding to the position of the celestial bodies on specific dates. Why such precision if this is just decoration? Amalgam was created using complex formulas. An alloy of silver, mercury, and other components in precisely calibrated proportions produced a surface with special properties. It reflected not just light, it interacted with something greater. The rules of placement look like an instruction for installing equipment. A mirror cannot be placed opposite a door. It creates an unwanted channel. Two mirrors facing each other are prohibited. A resonating circuit, an amplifier, is formed. Is it a coincidence that these rules are identical to the principles of antenna placement? Mirrors were a part of a global technological system. Like cathedrals with domes, like star fortresses, they were nodes of a network that encompassed the entire planet. Imagine such a system. Cathedrals with their tall spires and copper domes captured atmospheric electricity. Fortresses shaped like stars distributed this energy throughout the territory, and mirrors functioned as nodes of an information network. They did not transmit energy. They transmitted information. Reflected light is a coded signal. The amalgam preserved imprints not just of light, but of the information contained within that light. Certain proportions of metals created a memory effect similar to modern magnetic media, but operating on a different principle. Two mirrors installed correctly could create a communication channel between remote points, not a mystical portal, a technological data transmission channel. Through resonance and through certain frequencies of light waves, Astronomical symbols on the frames indicated not mysticism, but the necessity of synchronization with cosmic cycles. Cosmic cycles were merely external frequencies, mostly determined by the parasites who controlled the moon, and other frequency-emitting hardware. For the system to operate, precise tuning to these cycles was required. After the reset of 1728, the physical conditions on the planet deteriorated gradually over the next 300 years. Wi-Fi, radio waves, Baphomet power pylons carry entropic energy to houses from the transformer power stations, the dismantling of Tartarian nodal edifices that were all tuned to the same network frequencies, the mud flood reducing the piezoelectric properties of the construction materials used in these buildings, rooted in deep water table groundings. Atmospheric electricity, free energy, became unavailable or significantly weakened. The mirrors began to malfunction. They continued to work, but incorrectly. Instead of relaying current information, they were issuing fragments of old records. People saw residual signals from the past, images preserved in amalgam decades or centuries ago. Those who stared into mirrors for a long time didn't have a mental disorder in the usual sense. It is an overload of the consciousness with information from another time, information that the brain cannot process correctly. Some people turned out to be more sensitive. Mediums possibly had the ability to tune into these frequencies. Their sessions with mirrors were not magic, but the use of remnants of technology, the principle of which they understood intuitively. Old mirrors held records of a previous civilization in their amalgam. There were impressions not only of images but also of knowledge, technical schemes that someone once contemplated before the mirror, maps of territories, faces of people who lived in that world. These mirrors were not mystically dangerous. They were informationally dangerous. They could show the truth about what existed before the reset, about a civilization that possessed technologies based on completely different principles. That is why a decision was made to simplify the technology. At the end of the 19th century, the mass production of mirrors shifted to new methods, chemical silvering instead of amalgamation, simplified formulas, standardized processes. The new mirrors reflected only the current reality. They were dead in the sense that the old mirrors were alive, capable of preserving, and under certain conditions reproducing information. Mental disorders associated with mirrors have sharply declined, not because people have become more educated or less superstitious, but because dangerous equipment has been replaced with safe alternatives. Overlay the maps of old mirror manufacturers with the maps of star fortresses. The matches are too precise to be a coincidence. Production concentrated in certain locations. Venice, Bohemia, Russia. Not where the resources were, but in places of ancient nodes. Correlate the dates. Manufacturers opened precisely at the sites where for centuries prior, the largest temple complexes and fortifications stood. Historians usually say that there were ideal conditions for production, sand of the right quality, access to fuel. But then why did production cease synchronously exactly when wars and revolutions began? It is not a coincidence that old technologies were forgotten simultaneously in all these places. It's all planned. Tartaria worked with a different physics. They used the ether, atmospheric electricity, and resonance. Their technology seemed like supernatural magic to those who came later. Cathedrals captured energy from the atmosphere. Fortresses distributed it across the territory, and mirrors transmitted information. After the fall of this civilization, equipment was left without instructions. 19th century people faced artifacts they did not understand, hence the fear. Hence the tradition of closing off. It was an attempt to protect themselves from something that operated by unknown rules. And when the old mirrors began to malfunction in mass, showing fragments of the past and causing mental disorders, a quiet cleansing began. Many antique mirrors were intentionally destroyed in the early 20th century. They were shattered under the pretext of wars and revolutions as symbols of the old world, as items of bourgeois luxury. But they were destroyed selectively. The new mirrors were left untouched. Only the old ones made using ancient technologies. The tradition of closing mirrors is the last echo of memory about the previous catastrophe, the last warning we receive from those who survived the fall of the previous world. A warning that some technologies are dangerous, that some knowledge is better left forgotten, that some doors are better kept closed. The people of the 19th century were the last generation to still maintain a living connection with that memory. They lived at the intersection of worlds, the old and then the new, the traditional and the industrial, the mystical and the rational, the natural and the synthetic. So, considering all the unusual attributes to red mercury, the mirror references in movies and stories throughout the years, the fact that the awakening itself is uncovering and previously fringe, unknown architectural technology, we have what Christian 21 explained about lattice membrane networks, frequency and vibration, simulation aether, and the harmonious nature of a true soul's normal existence, before insertion here into Realm 3. In short, considering what the awake now know and understand to be reality, thanks to Christian 21 and his bizarre, yet strangely familiar, set of information, we can see that communication has been completely inverted also, turning spiritual technology into negative EMF-emitting technology that you need to pay for. They replaced our telepathy with telephones, then mobile phones and the internet replaced our knowledge acquisition capability, or our pineal gland fluoridated and dampened shrank to a useless defunct size, meaning we are unable to know what we need to know when we need to know it. But we know what we need to know to be at the right vibration to get home, thanks to Christian, and that's what matters. So Snow White, Fancy, and Apple? Big love, Leon.